Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PhotoBiz Live. This is Joanne from the PhotoBiz team, and today we're being joined by Jamie Hayes for a webinar about posing and lighting for profit. This webinar is full of simple to advanced lighting and posing techniques that will thrill your clients and add to your profile. Building a camera room in a very small space, environmental lighting, and Jamie's top 20 selling poses will all be shared. In addition to getting the opportunity to learn with Jamie in today's webinar, we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You can submit your questions using the chat tool and they'll be answered after the presentation. And you can also join in the discussion on Twitter by using the hashtag #PhotobizLive. If at any point during this webinar you have difficulty hearing the speaker or seeing the slides, please use the comment box to let us know. We'll also be recording this webinar and it'll be available for replay on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/photobiz. With that being said, I'll turn things over to Jamie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be sharing with you a little bit about posing and lighting, and I want to start first by saying I've had the honor and privilege of being a professional photographer for over 30 years. Our studio's been open for 20 years, and this is my full-time profession, so we've been able to enjoy not only the profitable side, but also the very lucrative emotional side of what we do, and are very honored, blessed to be able to help you guys today and share a little bit with you. Now, everything that I'm going to share with you, I didn't invent any of this stuff. I don't take credit for any of it. I have just, throughout my career, have worked with different people who have mentored me and allowed me to take their knowledge that they shared with me. I've turned it and added my own twist and flair to it, and then I'm putting it back out to the world. So there are millions of ways to do anything. I'm just going to share with you today my ways to do it. Hayes and Fisk Photography is our business. I have a business partner, Mary Fisk Taylor, who is amazing. We are actually the perfect yin and yang of business and photography too. So couldn't do it on my own. It takes an army sometimes just to get through any given day. Also, of course, everyone at PhotoBiz, boy, what more can we say? They're absolutely fantastic. White House Custom Color, who is our lab and part sponsor, as well as the Mac Group for all of our equipment. At any time, if you guys would like to spend time with me one-on-one and actually photograph live, we are going to be spending a week at Light Pro, which is the 1st of September. You can go to lightproexpo.com. It's sponsored by the Larson Enterprise, who make our soft boxes, and it's a fantastic one-on-one for 4 days. They have 12 shooting bays, and that's where I'm going to be demonstrating all that I'm going to share with you today, only in person. So if you guys would like, come join us on Captiva Island. It's amazing. First, I want to start off a little bit about some basic things that I'm going to throw out there that we use to standardize everything, and then building blocks for what I'm about to share with you as far as lighting goes. First would be white balance. Depending on if you're using strobes for any of your work, whether it be indoors or outdoors, in an additive light situation, read your strobe manufacturer's instructions onto what they recommend that your white balance be set at, as well as you can use wonderful targets. This is the Color Checker Passport, which is made by X-Rite. This is amazing. I carry this in my camera bag. And whenever we're looking at images, I never judge anything with the back of my camera. I always judge on a balanced monitor once we get back to the studio. So highly recommend, don't judge your work by the camera, the settings on the back of your camera, or the LCD panel in the back of your camera, but on a correctly profiled monitor, which means that that monitor is neutralized so that what you get in print from your printer matches your monitor. If you have multiple printers that you work with or multiple labs that you work with, you'll need one for each lab. We only use one lab, so for us, everything we do at this point in the game, 20 years in, is streamlined so that we use as little physical human touch to it as possible, which allows us to spend maximum amount of time with our clients, not in the technical realm. A little bit about light metering. I choose not to use my camera meter to create my exposure. This being that the camera meters are reflective and they are judged or biased toward the skin or tonality of your subject, clothing that your subject's wearing, and the environment in which your subject is standing in. I prefer to use incident meter readings. I use a handheld light meter. These are the Sekonic meters. These are the older versions. There are more digital versions available, but a meter is a meter. I use this to measure the light that falls on the subject versus the light that's bouncing off of the subject. When I take a meter reading from the subject position, it doesn't matter what tonality or what color clothing or the environment that the subject is standing in. They will be perfectly exposed, and this is true with African American, Asian, Caucasian, every skin tonality possible. So to streamline, I never depend on my camera meter. I always depend on a handheld light meter. All meters the same. They meter only 18% gray. That's why in some of the automatic or program modes when you use your camera meter, sometimes you'll take a picture and it'll be way over and underexposed. The camera is actually doing its job, and so is the meter. It just means that you need to use the human brain to analyze to say, hey, is this scene greater than 18% gray reflectivity or less than 18% gray reflectivity? Now, on a day-to-day basis, there's no way I have time enough to think about all of that. So that's why I'm saying, for me, I'm going to be talking more about incident light meter readings today than using your camera meter. Also, tripod heads, I love the Manfrotto grip head. This allows us to pose very quickly. I work with a tripod all the time. Hansen Fong Easy Steps, these I could not live without. These are styrofoam blocks that allow you to change your height or the subject's height and position. Also, some type of radio control enabling you to fire your strobes remotely so you're not connected with a cord. The MicroSync 2 is an amazing product. It sells for just a little over $100. It comes with all the different interchangeable heads and works with speed lights and studio strobes, and also allows you to fire the camera remotely without being behind it. Tamarack bags, we keep everything organized in one bag. This is my one camera bag. I have all of the camera equipment in the studio in one bag so that I can jump in the car or hop on a plane at any given time, and I know where everything is situated. In the studio and outdoors, we use Larson softboxes, which are made in America. These are the smallest profile, which means from the front baffle or that front white screen that you see to the very back, they're the thinnest possible. By keeping them very thin, they're easier to move around and manipulate, so that way you can change the lighting on your subject easily. If it's very hard or difficult or complicated for you to use as far as equipment goes, chances are you're probably not going to use it during a session. Now, for me, creating a simple lighting concept is the secret. I don't care what type of lighting you prefer to use, but have a simple basic concept that will adapt to every style of lighting. Here's why. Some people use just a reflector and a big softbox, which is great if you're in the studio location. But what happens if you go outdoors? Reflectors are great, except for, let's say, on a rainy day or on an overcast day. So if you tend to have a certain setup for weddings, a certain setup for portraits, a different setup for window light, a different set for environmental, a different thing for 100 people, environmental and location, you're going to have to keep a lot of knowledge in your head. I'm going to share with you a technique today which I have used, which allows me to only think about one thing constantly, no matter what lighting situation I'm in. I only have one answer, which has helped us streamline and also make our photography repeatable. I can go back and tell you how I've created every single portrait that I've ever created in my entire life, how I lit it, what I used, and the reason I've been able to do that is because I've used the exact same thing for all of my professional career. So it makes it really simple when you don't have to have a whole lot of gear and a whole lot of answers or solutions to different lighting problems. Streamline whatever you choose, streamline your lighting down to where it's easy and you can create it without an assistant. If you work with an assistant, that's wonderful, but if something happens, that assistant is sick, they get hurt while you're at a session, you're going to need to fly by yourself. So I always work without an assistant. Every now and then I have the luxury of working with an intern, but for majority of the times I'm doing everything all by myself. I do use Pro Photo lighting, which in my opinion is the absolute most proficient lighting tool in the industry. They make the most amount of light modifiers, what allows you to manipulate the light from hard light to soft light. They also are the most consistent with color temperature and exposure from from the beginning of your session to the end of your session. And it doesn't matter even how fast you photograph, their recycle time is extremely consistent. They're also the #1 rental piece of lighting rental equipment in the entire world. So even if you travel, you don't necessarily have to carry your own gear with you. You can rent. Whenever I photograph in New York City, for instance, I rent my equipment. I don't take my equipment with me. Also, the great thing about ProPhoto is that with the air system, everything is remote controlled from your camera position, which is amazing. You can control power, everything from camera position, so it requires less physical energy for you to walk back and forth. They also make a battery-operated version as well as the studio-operated versions as well. Professional lighting, to me, is the difference between a good image and an amazing image. Today, everyone has availability to super technology. Cameras are much higher resolution than we ever really need them to be. So even our consumers, our clients, have the ability to purchase cameras in the $1,500 to $2,000 range. So lighting and posing is what's really going to make the difference. Now, the only light I'm mostly concerned about is the main light of the face. It creates the base exposure. It controls the shape of the subject and also controls the contrast of that subject as well. The location determines the shape. Now, in these 3 examples, I haven't changed my exposure and I haven't changed my camera angle. The only thing I've changed is the position of the main light. As the artist, you have the choice to decide which one looks the best. Lighting can elongate a face. It can make eyes wider. It can diminish double chins. It can diminish shine to the skin, scars to the face. In this particular situation, to me, our best reflection of this subject would be the image on the right. Her face now is more oval. I've minimized the squareness of her jaw. I've minimized the roundness of the tip of her nose and also elongated her face, making it much longer. So again, as the artist, you can move the main light to what looks the best. For more information on lighting, you can go to the PPA website, Professional Photographers of America, PPA.com. If you join the PPA, which I highly recommend, it gives you indemnity insurance, but also unlimited information on the web about professional lighting tools and lighting patterns that I've used here. The size of your light source is going to control the contrast. Now, it doesn't matter what type of strobe that you're using. There are advantages and disadvantages to each, but you need to know what type of light pattern that your strobe provides. This is a Canon speed light, and it does have a radio control, that microsync that I showed you earlier connected to it. In each of these 4 examples, we've actually put different types of light modifiers over top and the front of that strobe to change the throw of light. The most important thing I want you to see here is that the area, and I'm going to point it out, this area of transition here. Notice how we go from light to dark very quickly, and that's a very defined, harsh light. That's with no light modifier on top of the camera strobe. This example is with the wide-angle diffuser that's built into the strobe pulled out, which now, if you notice, that transition between the highlight and the shadow is increased over a greater distance, which makes the light softer. It's actually diminishing the contrast. Not the power or intensity, just the contrast. The bottom left image is using a Stoffen Omni Bounce, which is more of a plastic dome, a little square box like that fits over top. And the bottom right is something more like the Gary Fong light sphere light dome. So depending on the strobe that you are using and depending on the light modifier, just know the pattern and the contrast. The stronger the contrast, the more detail of the skin that's going to show. Now, I'm a portrait wedding photographer, so all of our finished images for our clients have been retouched. So for me, taking down the shine on the skin, any blemishes on the skin, lines under the eyes and neck, smoothing out the skin is most important. No matter how sharp our lenses are, what lighting modifiers we use to make that lighting smooth, you're still going to use some sort of manipulation at the end. We choose not to do our own photographic retouching. I don't work with a computer except for allowing our clients to make their selections. We use ProSelect in the studio. All of our ordering is done in studio, never done online, where we have control over the sale. And we are true photographers. I didn't start the photographic industry to be a photographic retoucher or a darkroom rat. So now in this world of technology, everyone has the ability to do their own retouching, but we pay $2.75 per file, not per head, for retouching. So I can't sit for hours at a computer and retouch less expensive than I can pay a professional to do it too. It's really a whole different career, all gosh, lost word. It's its own career. It's its own standalone entity as far as learning to manipulate and retouch. So here's a perfect example of looking at two different types of contrast. The image on the right was created with a 4x6 Larson softbox. The image on the left was created with a ProPhoto soft light reflector, which is more like a beauty dish. It is much more of a harsh type light. You'll see them on Project Runway constantly, and America's Next Top Model. They use the beauty dish constantly. But notice the difference in these two images. Number one, look at the detail in the eyes. The image on the right, because the contrast is diminished, we've brought out more detail to the eyes. The shadow side seems to be a little less dark than the other. It actually isn't. It's just the contrast. The fill light in both of these images hasn't changed. It's just that because we're using a larger light modifier on our main light, the contrast is thrown over a bigger area. You'll also notice that the scars on the subject's chin and the shine on her forehead is greatly diminished. Also look at the detail in her hair. I prefer to use the largest light source possible when I can and when it's feasible to, because it does give me that wonderful light quality and diminishes the amount of excessive retouching or post-production that I'll need to do to the images. Again, here, you as the artist, you get to choose what's right for your environment and for your brand. But for us, whenever I'm photographing people, I always want the skin to be as pretty as possible. No one likes to show their age in a photo. This is a perfect example of a low contrast image. Beautiful, soft, velvety baby skin, lighter background, and lighter contrast. Notice the shadows are not very deep, and that there's the background, the clothing, and the subject all match in the same key. This is a perfect example just using that soft light modifier, that soft light reflector from ProPhoto, how using just one light can create more of that contrasting image. Notice the shadows are darker. Underneath their chin, that shadow line is greatly increased too. And we've placed the subject close enough to the background that you get some of that shadow as an added second element. So that's a perfect example of a low contrast image and a high contrast image. Accent lighting is something that's kind of like a spice in a recipe. Accent lighting is going to bring out texture and detail to your subject. Accent lights come from behind, and they can be the same intensity or up to 1 f-stop higher than the main light. Now, there's lots of variations depending on your mood and your feeling, but in this particular instance, I've got two accent lights, one coming from the right and one coming from the left. It's brought out detail in the bust of our subject, but also look how thin it cuts into her waistline. You actually can see how small her waist is and separation. So to me, accent lights are extremely important because they bring out great detail and take your photography to the next level. The trend today is to photograph outdoors on an overcast day or at sunset when the lighting is a very low contrast light. That's great, but it doesn't bring out detail in your subject. And if your subjects are image conscious, if they're concerned about the way they look, it's your job as a professional photographer, in my opinion, to use your lighting so that you flatter the subject in their best way. Let's talk a little bit about working indoors. Our camera room is probably one of the smallest camera rooms that you'll ever use. This is a small bedroom in a Cape Cod house. It's 11 foot from wall to wall, 10 foot deep, and I'm actually taking this photo that we've backed out into another room about another 4 feet. The softbox that you see to your left is a 4 by 6 foot softbox, 8 foot ceilings as well. If you'll notice too that the main light is, because of the size of it, you pretty much have two options. It can go from the right or to the left, raise it up a little bit, lower it down a little bit. But this camera room is extremely efficient. There's no props anywhere except for the easy steps, which are stacked in the corner here. And actually I have them stacked to the ceiling. I use tons. I probably have about 7 sets of those easy steps. And if you're going to photograph families of any size at all, you're going to need lots of those. So we use those instead of posing chairs in the studio. We also use them outdoors as well. One thing that I want you to notice, though, is look how consistent the lighting is. If you look at all 4 corners of that background as well as the floor in front, notice that there really aren't any shadows, and a subject can move anywhere around this background and be perfectly exposed. Maybe off as much as a half a stop if they're standing right in front of that softbox. But this is the whole concept I was telling you about earlier that will help make your life so much easier. So let's take a little more look about how we come to this lighting concept. First of all, the 4x6 foot Larson softbox. I used it on a little rolling stand. This is a photogenic stand. It's weighted at the bottom. You can see here how small it is compared to that softbox. A regular light stand, the footprint of the stand would be such that that stand would actually be onto the background and or in the photos. So I love these air cushion stands that I can raise this my strobe to the ceiling or take it to the floor, but it allows me to move it around easily from one side to the other. And this is what it looks like with just the main light on. Notice that how consistent the lighting is from toe to face and how even it is over all 4 corners. There's a little shadow gradient. That's a good thing. I never retouch shadows off my backgrounds or out of my photographs. Where there's light, there needs to be shadow. Taking that away just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Fill light is placed at the camera position. Here it shows a side angle of the studio where you can see that I stand in between, just in front of that softbox. So that's on the fill light. That's a Larson Starfish. Use the largest one that you possibly can. It throws light in 180 degrees. Basically, it kind of looks like an on-camera flash. It creates no shadows on the subject whatsoever, none on the face and none on the body. Lighting ratio, the intensity of that fill light is going to depend on your personal taste. I recommend somewhere between a 3:1 to 5:1 lighting ratio. Love to use this tiny little AC slave. It's a screw-in slave. It's about $60. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. It's about $60.
And it sounds like we're having a little bit of trouble with the audio. If you guys want to just kind of stand by and I'll see what I can do with this.
Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Jamie. Yeah, it keeps cutting in and out. Oh, I think we lost you again.
How about now? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'm
Can
getting
you guys
feedback.
hear me now?
Yeah, I'm getting feedback saying they can hear you now.
Can you guys hear me better?
Yeah, people are saying they can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why it keeps going in and out. I've got my microphone plugged into my laptop, so hopefully let me know as soon as possible if you guys can't hear. So anyway, this is my hair light, and all the hair light is creating just a little bit of contrasty light on top of the head. You don't want it to be too much, especially if you're photographing men who use like gel in their hair or a female who uses product in their hair, because it's going to look oily and not clean. I do bounce 2 lights off of the ceiling on either side that are aimed from the back to the front. These lights create evenness across the entire background, and they diminish that shadow from the main light. So basically what I do is I meter my background with the dome of my light meter out, the shutter speed on the meter at 125, and for me, I photograph always in the studio at f11. So I want to make sure that all 5 areas of the background meter f11, so that if the subject moves a little bit, that I don't have to reset the subject or reset the lighting constantly. This is what it looks like with all the lights turned on. Shadows are great right where they need to be underneath the subject. You have really beautiful lighting ratio from the highlight to the shadow side of the face and great detail. The beauty of this type of lighting scenario is that I never have to change my exposure or my ISO whenever I change backgrounds. If I want a darker look or a more low-key image, all I simply do is change the background. The background does absorb a little bit of the light, which makes the shadow side a little darker, but that's perfect. That's exactly what I want.
Looks like we've lost the audio again. Let's see if I can get him back. Hi, Jamie. We lost you again there for about 20 seconds.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
All right. So this is what the high key image looks like. Now the great thing here is that you don't get blown out detail. No matter what the background is, you can simply change it based on the subject. And here's a great example. Here's a family sitting on the ground with just that high key white paper. And here's the exact same lighting scenario just with a black fabric put up as the background. So the great thing about this whole lighting concept is that I never have to change a thing to get perfect lighting no matter what type of outfits my subject's wearing. And while they're changing clothes, I can simply change the background and don't have to worry about the lighting. So it makes it really simple. Also, if I'm photographing a baby session where I'm doing the little hands and feet, I can use lens compression to throw the background or the baby out of focus, still at f11, and then I can photograph a family of 10 right after that, and I don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I changed the exposure. I know that anytime I change a variable in the camera room, there's a good chance that I'm not going to remember to turn it back. So if I keep everything really simple, my chances of getting great results session after session after session are much greater. We photograph 7 sessions a day. They're about an hour to an hour and a half long. So I need to make sure that I may have a high school senior versus a family versus a bride versus a baby. So if I have those sessions back to back to back, I can't really stop and take time to change everything because it would mess up the flow and I'd be spending more time with my equipment than I would be with my subjects. So I'm going to share with you now, once you have a basic lighting concept, you can really spend time with your subjects to get the most storytelling ability from that session. So the lighting can be manipulated by either bouncing one light from the ceiling or turning one off. So with that simple lighting concept and all the lights turned on, you can simply change backgrounds. For instance, here I used more of a gold tone background and gold fabric to match the mom's golden hair. In this situation, I didn't do anything but put that black fabric down on the floor, stood on top of my easy steps, and photographed directly on top of the children. Now, see those 2 lights in the back that are bounced off the ceiling? They pretty much turn the ceiling into one huge light source. So it doesn't matter, even if I'm photographing down on the ground and I'm standing over top of my subject, I still get amazing perfect light. Something else that you can do is turn those 2 strobes, aim them at the subject, and you get this. You get a little more punchy light. Here that black fabric is just down to it, touching the hardwood floor. So it changes the whole mood and feeling of the image. But again, I still haven't changed the power of any of the strobes, and I haven't changed my aperture or ISO. This particular situation, I've bounced the light on the left off the ceiling while I've aimed the other light on the right at the subject and put a small strip light on it. Notice you get that extra punch and direction of light on the subject's face and across mom's tummy. You'll also notice in this area up here you get a little bit more contrasty light. So just by simply changing a few things, you can get a different look. Here's a great example. I've totally turned off the light that's on the right. I've only used the main light and the bounce light that's on the left. How crazy is that? It's so cool because you can mix and match and stylize the lighting to your taste. This image was created with both of those lights turned off. Simply a main light and a fill light. Zoomed in close enough and created the most, a composition that encloses, engulfs everyone, and still perfect exposure. Now, I choose to use a fill light in the studio because it's consistent. I don't have to take time to move a reflector in and out, and the reflector is going to change every time I move the main light. You need to reposition the reflector. Now, I choose to do that because we sell a lot of multiple images, either matted and framed together on an image block or a wall block, or in an album. So what happens if you choose to use a reflector? No problem. Just know that there are different fabrics for a reflector, and depending on where you position the reflector is going to depend on where that lighting position is. Every time you reposition the main light, you must reposition the reflector. Now, depending on where you place that reflector is going to depend on the intensity of the light. The image to the left, no reflector. The image in the middle behind the subject, which I'm not a big fan of. Notice how it puts that, you go from the light on the left of her face to the shadow side, then you go back to shadow, and then you go back to highlight. The image on the far right is probably the most proficient on how to use a reflector. Now, if you want more light on that shadow side, push the reflector in a little bit. If you want less, take it out a little bit. The one thing that's hard with a reflector is consistency. So if you sell products that have multiple images side by side, or if you want more of a consistent exposure in the shadow area from the beginning of your session to the end, I would recommend using a fill flash from camera position more than I would recommend using a reflector. Now, a couple things that you can do with reflector that are going to add a little bit more drama and a little more dramatic that you can do with strobes, but it's a little bit easier with reflector, would be when you place the reflector underneath the subject, or here I've positioned it to the immediate left of the main light. These are radical positions on where to use the main light, but these are the results that you get. When you place the reflector opposite the main light correctly, as you can see in the left image, the shadow side is filled in without light coming from behind. The middle image shows you get more of that glamour light when the reflector is placed underneath the subject, and then when it's right beside the main light, you get more of that wraparound light, which is probably most preferable. Now, light does not wrap around anything. Light only travels in one direction. The term wraparound light is what's used, and what I mean by that is that on the image on the far right, you go from shadow, from highlight on the subject's left side to shadow, and there's no other lighting coming from the back on that side. Light can be either additive or subtractive. Now, in the whole entire world, there's only two things you can do with light. You can add it to your subject, you can take it away from your subject. Okay? So I kind of like to break lighting down into two simple light forms, additive or subtractive, and then from there I determine the tools that I'm going to use. Let me show you a little bit and explain in greater detail about each. Additive lighting. Additive lighting using reflectors. This is where the subject is placed in a location where there's not enough light on the face. There has to be a reflector that brings light into the face that creates the pattern and shape and density of the light on the face of the subject. Here we've placed the subject underneath a gazebo. You can see there's a little bit of light that comes in from the upper left, but also look how dark the eye sockets are and underneath the chin. By using a reflector to the subject's left, we actually can add that detail back in. Something else that you can do in situations where, again, you may not have the best light. Here I've moved the subject away from the gazebo. The lighting on the face is much better. However, the eye sockets around the mouth and under the nose and under the chin are still not as good. When you use a reflector as the main light, it not only does it allow you to add that light back in, but you can also use a reflector as a kicker light or as the accent light. Here I've placed a gold reflector way in the background to add warmth and pick up some sunlight. Let me show you an overall view to show you where those two reflectors are positioned. The one super silver reflector or metallic silver was used to light and bring in detail to the subject's left of her face. Now, my camera position is far camera right outside of the viewing position, but if you'll see to the far left, there's that gold reflector that's picking up the raw sunlight and bringing it back into the subject's face. Reflectors are great. You will probably need stands or an assistant. Now, I choose not to have my clients hold the reflector because it is a skilled set, and I really don't like to tell my client, no, you're not positioning it right, no, move it this way, no, move it that way. To me, I don't think that's great communication with your clients. When they're paying me to create images for them, I certainly don't want them to do the work.
Okay, looks like we're having some technical difficulties again. He should be back with us in just a moment. Hi, Jamie. We lost you there for a second.
Again, sorry.
Yeah.
Are we back?
We're back, yeah.
You guys hear me? Okay, sorry. Did everyone get the last section?
I think we lost you right about the time, just as you were talking about the golden reflector bringing the sunlight back in. So.
Okay, so the gold reflector is actually going to bring sunlight in. Let me go back one slide. That light, that accent light that's on her right, was the gold reflector, and that's placed to the far camera left in this image, which is picking up sunlight from the raw, picking up light from that raw sunlight, bouncing it back again to her left, our camera right, which is on her shoulder. And again, that is this light, sorry, that's right here, down her hair and her shoulder. Again, that accent light kind of is like a spice. It adds a little bit of flair and a little bit of detail into that. If you're going to use reflectors, You're going to probably need to invest in stands, and probably I would recommend that you buy every single fabric that is available from the manufacturer. I also prefer to use all of the reflectors from the same manufacturer as my softboxes, because I'm reflecting light on the subject, and that's going to affect the white balance. I want to make sure that my white balance is always consistent, whether I'm using a softbox or whether I'm using a reflector. So I choose to want to work with the same brand. And also, the reason that you'll need to own all the fabrics is you're going to photograph probably on an overcast day when you're going to need the most reflective fabric possible, or in the evening. During the middle of the day, you're going to need a less reflective fabric, such as a muted silver and or white. Gold is great, but it's only good for accent lighting. So if any of those that you kind of feel that you don't need to purchase, the gold would be the one that I would say not. But as far as fabrics, I would recommend a translucent, a reflective white, a reflective silver, and a metallic or a super silver would be great to use. Let's look at, now at how we can do this using strobe. Now, this is the technique that I prefer, because with additive light with strobe, if I use a strobe on the face and my strobe is the same brand indoors and outdoors, I will get the same white balance on the subject no matter what. You can use just the regular flash white balance, which is programmed into your camera, the lightning bolt. That's about 7,000 degree Kelvin, which may be a little bit warmer than you prefer. I like somewhere between 5,800 and 6,500 degree Kelvin, and it kind of just depends if we're indoors or outdoors. Outdoors, you're going to pick up more cyan, which is more blue from the sky and green from the grass. So you might, in some instances, prefer a higher white balance to make the skin a little bit more warmer. Now, I always photograph in RAW. We don't do anything with the JPEGs from our camera, except for using them in ProSelect for our clients to make their selections. We do not manipulate, change, sharpen, retouch, light and darken. We don't open the images in Photoshop at all prior to our clients seeing them. We simply explain that these images have not been corrected for lightness, darkness, or retouched. Your final portraits will look just as good as everything that you see in the studio. And the secret of this is to make sure, if you're going to sell images professionally, make sure you have all of your samples appropriate in your studio. That way your clients don't have to guess what the final product's going to look like. So for me, I prefer to use Pro Photo equipment, battery-operated equipment outdoors, studio strobes indoors. That way, if I have a session that's indoor and outdoor, both together, like the high school senior I just photographed an hour ago, I know that her skin tone is going to be consistent from beginning to end. I also like to use a smaller softbox outdoors. This is the Larson 17-inch, because it's just big enough to give me the contrast that I require for outdoors, but also small enough that it's not a wind sail. It's not going to be blown over by the wind outdoors. Now, additive light is great because it's going to allow you to do this. I can pick the background, add the strobe, and I'm always perfect. So I never have to worry about the lighting outside, and it requires nothing more than a simple strobe and a camera and a radio control to connect the two. I prefer to always work on a tripod. That allows me to be able to make face contact and eye contact with my subject 100% of the time. I'm never asking my clients to smile or give me an expression while I have a camera stuck in blocking my face. So I think this makes our work look more natural and relaxed. It also puts our clients at ease, and I think they have a better experience being photographed. So here's a couple situations in where additive light works amazing. Actually, it works amazing for everything, but let me show you. If you're at a client on a location with a client's home, here I've bounced one strobe off the ceiling just like in the studio, and I've used my battery-operated Pro Photo strobe for the other. Notice I still get that wonderful hair light, great separation, wonderful shadow detail, and it's even lighting underneath the chair from beginning to end. Now, this was photographed in our gazebo in our garden. We have the wonderful luxury of being able to create multiple images for the same client from having their children photographed at the same age. So perfect, beautiful sunny day, one strobe in the gazebo, created this image. This is the second child's image, rainy day. So what are you going to do? Reschedule, or can you work with it? I think we're professional photographers, so I think we can work with it. So here's what you can do with additive light that you can't do with Reflector. I've used that 17-inch softbox as the main light, creating the main exposure on her face. I've used an accent light from behind. Now this is looking from behind the subject, so now I'm going to place some strobes behind the subject so that I get that sunlight look. I'm going to put a warming gel over top of it so it mimics sunlight and increases the color temperature of just that strobe. So now it's a little warmer. I'm going to add a light to create that diffused highlight and that shadow edge on the back wall. I'm going to use a 3x4 softbox, but I'm going to peel off some of that front baffle so that I create a very harsh shadow line in the back. Now the great thing is that if additive light allows you the technical ability to be able to work in any situation, wind, sun, beach, mountains, night, day, it doesn't matter. So this is a perfect example of why I choose to use additive light 100% for everything I do. That allows me, you can throw me to the wolves. I can create anything and I have the simple answer to do that. So here's a couple examples of how that one strobe can be used. Even in bright sunlight, I can overpower the background by increasing the power of the strobe or adding a second strobe into my softbox and overpower the sunlight. I can also work in dim areas like in barns and buildings and still keep separation between the horse and the back of the stall, for instance. I can photograph at the beach, creating smooth, beautiful light, even detail in the eyes. Whenever you're working at the beach is the only time I'd highly recommend if you can use a family member or if you can use someone else because the wind does pick up a little bit more. But notice in this particular image how even the lighting around the sand where the baby is sitting. That's the secret. That's the key of what you want to work with. You also, by using additive light, have the ability to create high key images after the sun is up over the horizon. Here is a situation where I've been able to create a perfect high key image on the beach by using additive light. Now this is really cool because if you can do this technique, you can outshine your competition in any arena. Let's look a little bit about subtractive lighting. Now this is how to take light off of the subject. This means that you're going to be working in bright situations where the sunlight is not really preferable, but by simply framing your subject using translucent panels in between the subject and the sun, you're blocking the sun from her, making a diffused light, while raw sunlight is spilling both on the background and on the foreground. Now, by doing this, when you place that panel between your subject and the background, you're going to need to open your aperture on your camera, which is going to do two things: lighten the foreground and background, changing the color tone or shifting the key, and also it's going to give you a shallower depth of field. As you open your aperture, your foreground and your background are also going to go out of focus. The only thing that's a problem with this type of lighting is that it's very flat. Notice that you've taken the detail away from the subject's stomach here in this situation. So contrasty light is sometimes really good and even good to add light back in. So let me show you what happens if I use that strobe again, bring it into the left. Here I've used an accent light to bring back that detail in the subject. Now, notice how now you have great detail. Tip the subject's head into the light. You get a little bit of that accent light on their face, too, as a little bonus. So that's the progression of being able to use subtractive lighting. Let me show you another example. This is in the evening when the sunlight is directly overhead. Notice, again, you get those dark eye sockets. And this is the setup without anything else in position. When you add panels to the top and to the left, you're forcing the sunlight to come in, and by sunlight I mean diffused natural light, not the actual bright sunlight, sorry. You're forcing that light to come in down underneath those panels, which gives you a lot more direction to the face. Notice the image on the left, how much prettier the eyes are, prettier the skin is, as opposed to the direct overhead light that's on the left. So again, that's using additive and subtractive lighting. Now, use whatever technique works for you, but that's everything that I could ever think to tell you about additive and subtractive lighting. Choose what works for you. I choose additive light because I don't have to work with an assistant. I can work in wind, rain, and I get consistent, repeatable results from beginning to end. Make sure that you own all the tools that you're going to need for those type of lighting scenarios and situations. because you don't want to get to the job or get out on location and say, wow, I really wish I would have had this. Now, that being said, let's move on now a little bit more to posing. Now, one thing that I spend probably 90% of all of my day doing is blocking the body. I'm moving people from the front of the camera to the back of the camera, behind someone, in front of someone, so that I can make their heads and bodies look more balanced. Basically, I move the larger subjects to the back, smaller subjects to the front, use their legs and arms to block parts of their body so that everyone looks more consistent. And it doesn't matter if I'm on a hilltop or if I'm at the beach. Basically, you always want to put smaller people in front, block mom's hips, waist, and stomach, and also create spaces between your subjects so that your eye flows evenly. A little foreground grass, a little mid-grain, mid-detail where the subjects are, and a little bit of that detail again, those sea oats or grass in the background. No matter how you position your subject, no matter how tiny your subject is, here there's about 5 foot distance between the two subjects. And I need to do that because she was so much smaller than him that photographing them side by side made his body look disproportionate to hers. Even when you're working at lower camera angles, posing or opening the body as we've done here on the mom and using the girls to block dad's body is again going to shift and make their perception of body size more consistent. Great thing when working with groups, again, always make the parents look the best, which means 9 times out of 10 never putting them in the front of the image, but placing them in the back layered so that their bodies look consistent. When you work with triangle and diamond compositions, you can add as many members to a group as possible. Start with your parents first, and then working, adding people on either side to balance out the image so that you don't look at any one person in the image, you look at everyone equally. You can also use shrubs and foliage to block feet if a child, for instance, would not take off their tennis shoes. Or you can also use posing more naturally. This is a perfect example of more of that lifestyle or freestyle photographing where the subject's just moving and you're photographing. Be very careful of which foot is forward, which foot is back, where the hands are positioned when you're doing this type of photography. Also make sure that you work in strong triangles or diamonds as more of a dynamic composition and work more with ovals and circles in a more or less dynamic composition. Here the father is positioned about 3.5 foot behind the mother and son, which balances his body. He is about twice the size of mom. So knowing how to position your subject's foreground and background will allow you the freedom to be able to make everything more consistent. Use props and little teeny objects that a child can hold in their hands to keep their hands and feet perfectly positioned. Use their hands to mimic and support and to allow you to create lots of freedom. You can also, when photographing infants, make sure that they're well supported. You can tip your camera forward or backward to be able to give them support. All of these are examples of using simple items like a car seat and like the parents in order to pose. I didn't use any props in any of these, nothing more than a blanket. So try to use as few of things as possible. I try to use what my clients bring in. That way I don't have to worry about children having any allergic reaction to anything, but at least the items that I'm using in the images are more personal. I like things to be a little bit more timeless and traditional and not as trendy, because trends tend to go in and out of style. Classic never goes out of style. Also, it allows us to sell larger wall portraits from images versus more trendy images. You tend to sell more 8x10s and 5x7s. Camera angle is probably the most important. I'm going to show you 3 images, this image, this image, and this image. By moving the camera angle, this is just changing my height, standing on ladders or easy steps. Notice what I've done to the subject's waist. I've actually diminished her waist, but more importantly, look what I've done to her face. Okay? A lot of us tend to photograph from our camera position or camera angle or our height and never changing your camera angle. I recommend that you change extreme camera angle based on your subject, and also have a concept. No matter what, whenever I go into a subject, I have 20 poses that I do every single solitary time. This allows me two things. One, the freedom not to worry about what I'm going to do for a subject, and also it allows me to give a consistent product to my client. After the first 20 minutes and I've created these 20 poses, and I do these whether they are indoors, outdoors, whether it's a baby or an engagement couple or a wedding or a family. If I create these 20 poses, the rest of my session, after the first 20 minutes, I can play and create all those amazing images that are creative and unique and different. I can do those because I have the confidence to know that I've got everything that the client needs in the sales room. Whether you do your own sales or whether you choose to have someone else do them, these 20 poses will always, no matter what, give you everything you need to create an album or a panel or a folio or an image block or a wall portrait. I always start with the full-length wall portrait pose first. It's always full-length because if everything goes south after this one image, I can still meet my average sale by selling one large wall portrait as opposed to starting with a close face shot where most people would buy a 5x7. Use different expressions, pensive expression, smiling expression, illustrative, which is not looking at the camera expression. I'm doing all of this on a tripod, so I'm not changing my camera angle. I'm simply moving, zooming in and out to create the composition that works. The great thing about this is that I can automate all of my production work with actions and with software, so I don't have to align every single image. When you hand hold versus using a tripod, you're probably going to have to do a whole lot of manipulating to get 5 images from 5 different angles to be the same composition or same crop. I always start from full length, move into 3/4 length, standing and seated, then move into to close-up photography, and then extreme close-up. If you work from that level, from full length to close-up, it allows you to get the most amount of poses in the shortest amount of time. Then you can create more fun, crazy, personal images that work just with the personality of the subject. So here's what you get in the sales room. Wall portrait, double images that you can sell 2 images side by side, artistic, creative images that are illustrative, not looking at the camera, that are more of that natural or freestyle look. You can create panels without having to worry about crazy cropping. You can create panels that have multiple images, close-ups and full length. You can do the same with other types of sessions too. These are black and white relationship sessions, which tend to be closer up. So it doesn't matter. Have 20 poses that you can do with each of the type of sessions that you do. Now make these uniquely your own so they match your true authentic personality and who you truly are as a photographer. But just make sure you have a system. That way you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I really wish I would have this, or I wish we would have had this. That'll hurt you more in the sales room than it will anything else. So again, move the mom more in your poses, leave the children sitting still as much as I can. The reason I do this is because I want to work as fast as I can. If I were to reposition the children each and every time, I would spend all of my time trying to reposition the children. It's much easier to move an adult and leave the children where they are. So here I've simply moved the mom to the back behind the children. She can look at the children. She can be in front of the children out of focus in the background. Now, guys, I created this at f11. So you can still get those images where the background is soft and velvety and slightly out of focus, even at f11. Just use lens compression to do it. That's a whole different webinar on its own. But now, always make sure you photograph a parent with each child or each subfamily. Make sure they face each other in those typical images so that you can, and I'm going to show you how that works in the sales room, but you want to change your main light position and change for each of those children. Make sure you have the children full length. Instead of repositioning and photographing just one child, I'll do all of the compositions that are full length first, and then move back into portrait pose, move back into each child full length, and then close up. repeat the same procedure with the second child, so that this is what you're left with. Now look at all the different combinations that you have, and these are just a few. But whether you are choosing each child individually, whether you're mixing children together, whether they're having their same panel themselves, whether you like compositions on the wall that are all of the same posture, in other words, all of these are more closer up images and with illustrative images. Here's where angling and facing those children into each other works great in a wall grouping. Now notice the cool thing is that no matter what the combination, I'm pre-designing everything as I'm photographing. By keeping that 20 concept, 20 poses, you can create in 20 minutes and 20 different sales from them. You're going to free yourself up so that no matter what happens, you're able to give everything in the sales room. Now, that concludes everything that I could possibly share with you in a 1-hour webinar on lighting and posing. If you guys want to come play, join me in Captiva Island for Light Pro Expo. You can go to lightproexpo.com. You can also contact us. Our website is hayesandfisk.com, HAYESANDFISK.com, and you can check out where we are. We'll also teach a week-long at Texas School in May. So now I guess we'll turn it over to questions. Thank you guys so much for taking time to join us, and let's take a few questions.
Great, thank you, Jamie. What a great presentation. We do have a few questions. One thing that I did have a number of people ask if it was possible that maybe you could take a moment and talk a little bit about your background lighting again, because I think that's when you were going in and out a lot, and
Sure.
when you were talking about your setup, we kind of missed some of that. So.
Yep. Hang on a minute. Let me let me go back to here, and I'll show you. So I have a main light, which is my 4x6, my fill light, which is directly behind me, and the two bounce lights off of the ceiling, this one and this one. There's that little hair light. These are positioned directly behind the background, aimed forward, turning the ceiling into a large softbox. By doing this, I've been able to create an even light. I don't aim light at the background. In my opinion, I think it is a mistake to aim light at the background. Because whenever you aim light at the background, it has to be really consistent, and the subject can't walk back there. Now, again, as I mentioned, my camera room is only about 10 foot, you can see in this slide. I don't have a whole lot of depth from, hang on, sorry. I don't have a whole lot of depth from here to here. So by bouncing those lights off the ceiling, I've got smooth, consistent, even lighting. And let me fast forward here a little bit. There's the lights bounced off the ceiling. They're about a 40 to 45 degree angle from the background, aimed toward the camera, and they're about 2.5 feet from the ceiling. Now, trust your light meter. You can eyeball these in, but your light meter is what you're really going to use. That's what that looks like with just the two background lights turned on. That's how even they are. And this is what you want. You want to have your meter dome out, and you want to aim your meter at the camera position, or at the camera, and you want to meter all 5 planes of the background to be the same. Don't get yourself frantic when you are off maybe 2/3 of a stop. Know that your camera, you can only change 1/3 of an f-stop no matter what. That's the smallest amount that you can manipulate on your camera, whether it's an aperture or an ISO or a shutter speed. So you can be within 1/3 of a stop and you're still fine. But basically what you want to do is turn that ceiling into a softbox that's returning the smooth, even, consistent lighting all the way across. So that's what you get. And by the way, she's standing 2.5 feet from the background.
Great, thank you, Jamie. I did have one kind of associated question. M asked do you meter the background with just your main light or with all your lights to get the F11?
You have to turn all your lights on, because when you take the exposure, you want all your lights on. So when I meter, and to get the background even, you have to have all the lights on. Minimum of 4. You can skip the hair light, but a minimum of 4 lights in the studio in order to create this lighting concept. But the key to this, and what makes it so uniquely beautiful, is that you can easily change, you can change from mid-key to low key to high key, and all you're doing is changing your background, never changing your exposure.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Let's see, Tanya asks, what was the name of those radio triggers again? She got the micro part, but she didn't get the...
Yep. They're the MicroSync. They're actually sold by Tamrac, the Tamrac Corporation, which is the maker of my camera bags. And they're the best in the world because they can hook to speed lights, and they can also hook to studio strobes, and you can fire your camera remotely. They sell for around $100 to $120 a kit for a receiver and transmitter together. microsyncdigital.com, or you can go to the MicroSync website or the Tamrac website, and you can get them at almost any major dealer. I prefer Midwest Photo or mpex.com. They're out of Ohio. I love buying all of my stuff from them. If you have a relationship with one vendor, it's better than trying to shop on live to save 20 bucks. I mean, God forbid, I would hate one of my clients to try to shop around for 20 bucks on me. You know what I mean?
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, I have a question from Adam, and
Sure.
Adam asks, he's asking about camera height, and he asks, what camera height works best for which type of body or face?
Mm-hmm. Good question, Adam. It varies depending on every single person. You kind of analyze your subject. As a general rule, start about the chest bone level for normal to skinny people. Okay, and then you want to change your camera angle up or down depending on what you think is going to flatter the subject. For more full-figured subjects, you want to photograph over top of them versus underneath them. And here's why. When you photograph on top, you diminish any of the chins. Notice in this image you get a little bit more fullness under the chin and face, and notice how you get less fullness. Know this. Any part of a subject that's closer to your camera lens appears larger than if it were further away. So if you want to diminish chin, photograph from a higher camera angle so the forehead is closer to the camera lens and the chin is further away. Only stick skinny people of size 0, size 1 look good when you're photographing from a low camera angle. I only use a low camera angle when I'm doing a high fashion shoot or a bride in a very skinny pencil style dress, because it will add height to their body. But you've got to make sure that there's no weight on the body, because a low camera angle makes the body heavier. So just be careful. I always recommend that the very first part of a session, you photograph your subject from a high camera angle, medium camera angle, low camera angle, and from both sides, just to see, and then stop and evaluate those images before you do anything more in the session. That way you can physically look on the back of your camera and choose which angle you think most flatters your subject. Plus, it gives your subject a little bit of breathing time. Once you've taken those couple sessions, you can go, okay, take a break. I'm just going to look at these and check out the, you never want to check out your body to make sure your eyes. But that'll give them a little time. They can go, whew, okay, that's awesome. And then when you start again, they're in a much more relaxed posture.
Great, thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Adam. Let's see, Sarah's got a question, and she asks, do you use a computer-generated wall grouping program to make the wall groupings, or do you have something pre-made in Photoshop that you insert the photos into?
Great question. No, I don't use Photoshop. We actually pay people to do that. And the name of our retoucher is retouchup.com. If you email me, I will give you a special coupon code that you can use for RetouchUp. It is retouchup.com. My email is Jamie, Jamie, at hayesandfisk.com. The program I've used here is ProSelect, and highly recommend it. There's 2 versions. ProSelect Pro is what I use because it actually has a built-in module. Once you do all the cropping in front of the client, you can push one button and it automatically launches Photoshop and crops to what your client just saw on screen. So there's actually no post-production or very little post-production. Everything is done with the client. Plus, you can also import images from a client's home, and they can see their framed products and portraits hanging on their wall right there in the sales room. ProSelect.com. And also, if you let me know, Ron Nichols is a well-known knowledge wealth base of information on ProSelect. If you go to the website, it's timeexposure.com. There's tons of tutorials that teach you how to use ProSelect. It is the #1 software I think you should own outside of Photoshop. Matter of fact, you don't even need to own Photoshop, but you have to have ProSelect in order to make a lot of money for your clients.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Let's see. Charlotte has a question. She said, you indicated to keep it simple for every shoot. So this is showing your consistency with the studio. What do you do for your weddings?
Exact same thing as I do in the studio, Charlotte. I keep everything the same. I start with my 20-20-20 concept. My poses are slightly different for a wedding in that you have more groups and things that you work with, but no matter what I do, I still work. I'm just going to leave this slide up. I'll change slides, guys, depending on your questions. But I do the exact same thing for weddings. I actually have a rhythm and a system of how and when to photograph so that I only move the parents of the bride once, I only move parents of the groom once, and I move everyone else in and out. So that way we minimize the amount of time that's spent between the ceremony reception doing the altar returns, and also minimizes the time. But basically, the great thing about this, and believe me, I photograph everything, weddings, children, commercial, I do a little bit of everything. So I developed my concept so that it works with everything. I don't have to reinvent the wheel with each session.
Great, thank you, Jamie.
Sure.
Okay, and Derek has a question. He asks, what is your lens selection for the small camera room?
This is going to blow your mind. I use one lens, and one lens only, and I didn't put it in here, but it is the Canon 28-300 IS lens. And I will tell you that most camera shops want you to buy the 7200, which is great, except for the fact that you can't do a full-length photograph in a small space. So that lens is totally irrelevant when it comes to that. So now you have to have a second lens. The 28-300 is everything you need from full-length to 3/4 to extreme close-up. It runs about the same amount of money that you're going to spend on a lens and a half. And without having to change lenses, I don't have to carry a camera bag on me. And I don't have to worry about getting dust in my camera sensor because I've changed lenses, especially at the beach in the mountains.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Beth has a question.
Sure.
When you have an outdoor shoot with a child, how do you keep the child within range while you're on a tripod?
Great question, Beth. Couple things that work great when photographing children. Number one is that I photograph children with a little teeny bit of intimidation. We always make sure that we have treats for children. Now, I specialize in photographing 18-month-old, which are the fastest moving subjects you can possibly imagine. But if you do two things. One, let a child hold something small, a flower if it's a girl, a rock or a twig if it's a boy. Teeny tiny. Children will pose themselves, and for 2 split seconds you can distract them. If you are already focused and on your tripod, now I use a technique where I use the camera lens in autofocus on my tripod. I lock in focus of where the child's going to stand and have them stand there. Mom's just outside the frame like this. So mom's in charge of hair and resetting the child when they move. Once I've achieved autofocus, I switch the lens into manual focus, because as long as that child doesn't move forward or backward, they can move side to side, they're still in focus. Also, I'm using about f8 to f11 outside, so that way the subject can move a little bit and they're in focus. If you tend to photograph wide open and you move or the subject move, you're dead in the water. That's probably why a majority of people who handhold have to take 1,000 shots of each pose, because there's only 1 or 2 that are going to be sharp in focus due to either you moving, the photographer, or the subject moving. But if you, again, work in that system and have your pre-thought and keep the children involved in what you're doing. Every child wants to be a part of something, and they want to help or do. So actually, I don't really photograph children. I put them in an environment in which they act favorably in my position.
Great, thank you. Okay, Liz has a question, and she asks if you can maybe give us a little feedback about how you deal with more difficult subjects like wheelchairs or upset babies.
Okay, great. Upset babies. Here, this is a cute baby to look at while you're looking. Upset babies. Children change their mood every 10 or 15 minutes. We allow, for smaller children, we allow an hour and a half in our camera room. So that way I have time for them to nurse or for them to get out of the grumpy mood. Always photograph children when they are at their best time, just before a nap or after a nap. Always have incentives, toys, treats. We bake cookies every day here at the studio and have for 20 years. So if the children are really good, they can have a treat when we're done. Consequence and reward. We were all raised that way. If you are good, you get this. If you do this, you get that. As far as wheelchairs, I will, if I'm working with anyone that has special needs, I will make sure that, one, can I move them from the chair? If so, then I will position them on a bench or the ground or something else. If they cannot, and it's multiple, which is another example, you can also cover the chair with a blanket or a background too.
We actually just lost you for a second where you said if they cannot, and then it cut out.
Okay, am I back on?
Yeah, you're back on.
I always find out if anyone with special needs, if it's a wheelchair, for instance, I ask if that person can be moved from a wheelchair and placed in a chair, which is always my first choice, even with the elderly, because nobody wants to be photographed in a chair. If you're working with multiple subjects, then I will pose someone in front of the chair to block the chair as much as possible. Or, can you guys hear me?
Oh, you're back now. Yeah.
Oh, hang on, wait a minute. It might be the WebNX thing. Is that better?
It is, yeah.
So I would first try to see if I can take the person out of the chair if possible, pose a family member in front of the chair, or cover the chair with a fabric.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Let's see. Oh, I think we lost him again.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I think we're back. So, and let's see here. Okay, and I have one more question. Derek asks, on slide 56, is the fill light behind the camera, or was the fill light behind the camera and the lens selection?
Let's see. Yes, fill light in my camera room is always in 56. Yes, this is the exact same position the image that I used for the lighting scenario that I used with both the lights bounced off the ceiling. It's the exact same thing, just change the background. But my fill light always stays in camera position. It never changes. And here I'll show you exactly where that is again. And I'm using my 28-300 Canon lens. So honestly, with that lens, I never really know what it's set at. I just do whatever looks good through the viewfinder. That's another beautiful thing about using that lens too, is that you really almost kind of forget that you have it. So there's the fill light position, and I'm normally standing right here.
Great, thank you for that. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Thank you so much, everybody, for the great questions and for joining us today. And Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to present all of this fantastic information to us.
Thank you guys so much for spending time. And if you guys have any other questions, you can feel free to email me. Maybe I'll catch you at another webinar somewhere, or like I say, we do Texas School for a week and Light Pro for a week. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, everybody. And a recording of today's webinar will be posted on the PhotoBiz YouTube channel at youtube.com/PhotoBiz. Also, be sure to check our blog and watch your email for updates about future webinars.